Good morning. We'll be getting started in just a moment. Good morning, and thank you everybody for joining us this morning. Just waiting for another second for a while a few more people enter from the waiting room. Okay, so thank you everybody for joining us this morning. We are launching the first of our data series this morning. We're talking about data landscape and strategy. It's quite a lot to talk through this morning. So we'll be specifically focusing on crafting your data strategy to ensure you get the maximize your data assets. So just some housekeeping rules to say that the session is being recorded and it will be available on demand on the Hart website afterwards. You'll see there's a Q&A box, so that's for any questions. We do want this session to be as interactive as possible, so please do put them in and we will aim to answer as many of them as possible as we go through. You'll also see there's a chat box that's really for any more technical issues or problems, and I'll be keeping an eye out on them throughout. So please put in your questions or any more technical issues, put those into the chat box. So I'm Joyce Harman, I'm Head of Client Services at Hart, and I'm delighted to be joined by such a fantastic panel this morning. So Alan, if you'd like to introduce yourself. Oh, Alan, can't hear you.
There we go. Good morning, everybody. Thanks for that, Joyce. Good morning, everyone. Thanks for joining us this morning. My name's Alan Prestrello. I'm the Managing Director of Hart Square.
Perfect, thank you. And Enrico?
Good morning, everyone. Thanks, Joyce. I'm Enrico Tizzano. I'm the Chief Transformation Officer at the Brooke.
Perfect. And Tori? Oh, Tori, you're on mute as well.
Schoolboy error. Yes, I'm Tori Cassie, Director of Nonprofit at m-hance.
Fantastic. So we have a great lineup of people on the session today. So please do put in questions and take advantage of that. You can ask them anything you want. They might not like me saying that, but you can. So if I just move on, just a bit about Hart Square, for those of you who don't know us, to say that we are a consultancy practice, and really what we're all about is enabling digital and change capacity within the non-for-profit sector. We've been doing this for over 15 years, and you can see by the number of clients we have, the number of projects that we've worked on, and also the scary figure that between the team we've got over 165 years of collective experience. I'm not going to say what percentage of that is mine, but just a little bit about Hart Square. So as I say, this is the first in our series of 4 webinars all about data. So today focusing on landscape and strategy, and all about the importance of developing your strategy and thinking about that when looking at any technologies or technology changes. Then on the 11th of July, we'll be moving on to talk about quality and management. So really the critical role about data quality and looking after that properly, really making sure that it can help you enable the changes with either changes to your current system or any new systems that you're putting in. Then we move on to on the 26th of July, looking at migration and integration. This is definitely one of the areas that we see that can cause an awful lot of challenges on projects. And so we'll be looking at sort of the complexities around that and really the importance of getting it right and how to think about doing that. And then for the final one on the 22nd of October, we'll be talking about leveraging the importance of that data. So you've done all this hard work to get to that point. So how can you do reporting, use analytics so that you can make some decisions based on the data that you now have, and how can that have an impact on the organization? So we'll be sending out links again afterwards. So we do encourage everyone to sign up for all 4 of the webinars. So I'm just going to run a quick poll, so bear with me. And what this poll is looking at, we'd ask you just to all quickly answer if you could. So what stage are you at with your data strategy? This is really just to help us kind of see where you are. So is it that you have one and it's been implemented and it's all going great? You have one, but it hasn't been fully implemented yet. You're kind of making some changes to it. You're in the middle of sort of developing one. You need one, don't really know where to start, or don't really know what a data strategy is, which we do know is a common thing. So I'm just going to let that run for another second. And if I end the poll and share the results. So interesting, nobody has one implemented, with the biggest percentage being people are in the process of developing their strategy, or they need one or don't know where to start. So that's quite interesting. And we do have some people that really don't know what a data strategy is. So we'll keep that in mind as we go through for the rest of the session. So I'm going to just stop sharing on that. And then I'm going to hand over to Alan, who's going to talk all about data and some stats around what we're seeing within the sector. Alan, you're on mute again.
Thanks, Joyce. So interesting feedback from the poll there, which does kind of correlate with what we expected to see. I think the concept of a data strategy is relatively new. I think the components, when we get into it and talk about it and people see it, I think it'll become oh yes, no, I do know that, and I am doing a lot of these things. But I think the data strategy is really a collection of those components and seeing how you can bring a lot of things together to drive a strategy to leverage the most of your data. To illustrate the level of data maturity, and data maturity is a kind of universal measure that you can think about in terms of how mature are you in terms of thinking about your use of data, how you govern data, its security, etc. So I was able to find an interesting report by an organization called Data Orchard, and they have produced a data maturity report, and they've analyzed the concept of data maturity for a number of years, but looking at the 2021, 2022, and 2023 reports, it was quite interesting to see some stats. So what they do is they look at 7 themes: uses, data, analysis, leadership, culture, tools, and skills, and then grade those into 5 stages: either unaware, emerging, learning, developing, or mastering, with obviously mastering being where we all kind of aspire to be. But it's not practical for someone to be absolutely, in a developing or mastering stage for all areas. So if we take a look at how the data actually comes across, good to see that 0 respondents are unaware of data maturity. And that's a good thing. If we then look at the yellow being the 2021 and the 2023 numbers in blue, we can see that the emerging area is growing. So we have got more people entering the concept of data maturity, understanding that it's an important factor and something that they need to be paying more attention to. Data literacy features quite a lot in emerging topics. When we look at learning, you can see that in 2021, a lot of people were in the learning stage. So we're looking to understand and develop their understanding of data and increase their data maturity. In 2023, initially that looks like that number is falling. But actually, as we advance the numbers, you can see that actually we've got a bit of an increase in other areas. So that is a good sign in the sense that people have shifted a bit more from learning through to developing and mastering. It's also worth noting that in 2023 was a bigger sample size. So you will see some sort of slightly different numbers coming through because they'll be talking to different organizations across the level of maturity. I think what is interesting about the data is kind of their summary that I've taken from the report, and that is, there have been advances in the area of culture and tools and uses, which is kind of a good thing. I think developing a data culture is important because everything else will flow from that. And then the tools help you manage it. And then the uses is kind of more around the policy of it. However, leadership skills and the analysis side, analysis is leveraging that data to actually draw conclusions. That seems fairly static. The most concerning piece, however, has been that the data scores, the actual nucleus of quality of data, the security of etc., has actually become a bit worse. So when we actually look at that, again, this is an extract from the report, it would suggest that some measures are getting worse. And these can be a little difficult to get your head around. So I've tried to highlight the keywords. Fewer say that they have good quality data. So an increasing number in 2023 is a bad thing. So we've got an increase in people who think that their data is of poorer quality. Likewise, more organizations say their staff are not data literate. That's quite concerning, because 58%, up from 47%, said they disagree that their staff are data literate. So again, an increase in the number in 2023 in the context of these questions is not good. And then likewise, unfortunately, they flipped the statement around on us just to keep me on my toes. And there are less people who have confidence about data security. 51% agree that they were confident about their security in the data, and that number has fallen. So I think overall, yes, these are just 3 stats, but it does illustrate that I think that data as a topic is becoming more prevalent in our sector. And I think that then bears out one of their conclusions, is that it's possible these lower scores relate to an increase in the awareness about the importance of these issues. And it's at this point that I kind of wanted to hand the topic over a little bit to our guests, first to Tori. Your thoughts on a statement like that, and reflecting on those stats?
Yeah, thanks, Alan. I think, yeah, is it surprising? It is surprising, because I think, but nowadays we do have more tools to be able to, I suppose, understand where there are breaches in security. So, that's always, highlighted through social media and the news as well, to make people more aware and probably concerned about how secure data is. And also the analysis of data. I think, technology has moved on now, so there are more tools available to enable organizations, really, I suppose, to understand their data, but people don't necessarily know how to use those tools with the data, if that makes sense. So probably 2 things there. One is, yes, I think security breaches are more widespread, or they're in the news a lot more than they used to be. And secondly, definitely that the tools that are available to analyze data. I know we're not talking AI and Copilot and things like that, but all of that really comes down to having the right data. So people, I suppose, who are responding to that report are aware of lack of the skills, or the lack of data compliance, and therefore they have increased. That would be my take. 2 points. Enrico, I don't know about you.
Yeah, I mean, again, really interesting sort of numbers there. And I think what I noticed, I've come from a commercial background. I've been in the charity sector for nearly 2 years now. And what I noticed when I first joined was that there was a lot of disconnected data. So there was a lot of third-party systems, spreadsheets, as well as our CRM. And it was requiring someone to manually extract that data from those various repositories to make sense of it. So within a specific area, people were confident about the data and were confident about the data what it was telling them. As soon as you looked organization wide at what are the insights that we have for the whole of the charity, that's where it became really difficult, because it needed multiple people to pull all of that data together, and then questions started to be asked about, okay, this doesn't look right, that doesn't look right, and then suddenly the confidence starts to drop. I also think that the increase in the move to cloud, I've seen a lot of charities sort of considering that path, and I think the majority have used SI, systems integrators, or a partner to go in and do that work. And again, I think bringing that knowledge into the charity, so when the organizations start looking at the security of their platforms and the security of their data, they're obviously raising questions based on their sort of significant experience of having done migrations in the past. So I think bringing that knowledge into the charity also opens up some people's eyes to what's really going on.
Yeah, thank you. And I think that I agree with both of you. I think that I actually take solace in this kind of thing, where I think if you look at the numbers, you look beyond just the simple stats and you question it yourself and use a little bit of experience. I think it's a good thing that we're actually looking at people being a bit more critical about it and not assuming that okay is good enough. They're now looking at it through a lens of, how do I avoid ending up in the papers or on social media, as Tori puts it, right? And that's a good thing. So moving on, I think then, how do we look at and understand data strategy? So I thought it was useful to put up something along the lines of correlation between data strategy. When do you use one? When do you need one? And how does it fit with your overall digital maturity? Now, digital maturity is something kind of, that's well known. We've created this kind of hierarchy of technology needs. It's based on Maslow's hierarchy. So for those of you who can remember your psychology 101 classes. This is me taking a bit of a bastardized approach on that. So apologies to Maslow for misappropriating his wonderful piece of work. At the functional level, we can start here, and this is where, you have core systems, and each system manages its own data, but it does so in isolation. It works, but you do have difficulty because you have pockets and silos. It's hard to have oversight when you've got 15 different systems and they're all working on a different backup schedule. They're on different systems. Some of them are in the cloud, some of them are in the SaaS platform, some are on premise, and your governance is a bit of a concern. Moving on, you move to a more secure stage where your data is secure and your management tools are starting to come in place. You're still dealing with kind of silos, but you've started to put security and a little bit of common practice around your different tools. You have defined processes and you're capable of transacting digitally. So you're starting to, maybe you've got a portal or you've got an online donations page. You're starting to take transactions because you are secure. If you haven't yet achieved secure, please don't go and take transactions. Probably a bad idea. You then move up into the integrated world. And I'd like to think that the majority of the people in the room here, the vast majority of the people in our sector, are in this space where you're starting to consolidate a lot of your data silos. You can bring data together. You don't necessarily have to have all your data in the, now unrealistic, single source of truth, but you're able to draw pictures of it. You understand how to bring analytics across different platforms, and you understand where each one is. You understand what it's doing. And then you get to the intelligence stage where you start moving to a system of intelligence where data is used to make decisions, and you move away from just being systems of record. So traditionally, I think 10 years ago, our CRMs used to be quite, systems of record focused. We can now ask our systems to do things for us. We can start using automation more, and we can start leveraging personalization to increase engagement. And I'm starting to see that a number of people are thinking about continuous improvement because if you get here, you have to keep running to stay here. It's one of those places you have to continuously improve because the world evolves very quickly. And then you get to the optimized stage, or kind of aligned with self-realization. I think this is where, a lot of people are looking to get to. Artificial intelligence, another series that we'll be running shortly, and we'll be promoting that. But I would encourage people to not start thinking about artificial intelligence unless you at least have a foothold in intelligent, and absolutely that you have really understood the security and you've got integrated levels. So that's a bit of a background piece. And then asking yourself, where should I have a data strategy? My opinion, and I'll open this up to our guests, is I think you need to think about a data strategy, even in its smallest context, when you get to the functional level, because as you start to enter the secure, you start to ask yourself questions that are basically the fundamental building blocks of a data strategy. So before we look forward and start answering the question functionally, what is a data strategy? Just wanted to pass it over to Enrico or Tori to see if they've got any thoughts on this.
Yeah, I mean, I think for me, the responsibility for data sat within a number of different areas, and the maturity within those different areas varied quite wildly. And so pulling it all together for me was an incredibly important step. And obviously that takes a bit of time because you're dealing with some processes and systems that have been in place for over 10 years in some instances. So, it's incredibly difficult to kind of take that away from the grasp of the person or the team that's been using that particular process or using data in a specific way for such a long time, and then having to retrain them on how to do it differently. So that was the kind of the start for me, was really identifying where our data was. There were a ton of reports being produced, for example, where, I'd ask the question, okay, so what's the data sources for these reports? And the people that had the answer to that question had left many years ago. And so the kind of assumption is, well, we're running these reports and it's all fine. So, that was the most important start for me, was really finding out where our data sat, how important was it to the individuals, and then, looking at how we move to a more mature model with regards to those data repositories.
Right. And Tori, any thoughts from you in terms of what you're seeing in terms of, clients we were working with?
Yes, definitely, Alan. I think, we work with organizations who are, relatively small and don't have as many integrations, for example, or complex segmentation needs, right to the very large, right to the other end of the scale. So I think in terms of the functional point at the bottom, I think it's just worth noting that, you know, you are going to have systems that are that remain not necessarily data in isolation, but they're still going to be best of breed systems. And our approach, you know, with our projects, you know, they're very data led, our projects, but it's very much ensuring that relevant data is in the right place to enable you to do your reporting, your segmentation, to your artificial intelligence and so forth. So not all your data needs to be in one place to achieve all of this. It's about having the relevant data in the right systems and the right reporting and security and intelligence as well. But, you know, I think sometimes when people say they look at replacing systems, they think they need to replace everything and all their data needs to be backed up into a data warehouse and, you know, and everything else, you know, these are bite-sized chunks as well. So different organizations will have different elements, I suppose, or depths of their data strategy. There's not a one size fits all. All these areas, all these beautifully colored areas, yes, need to be considered. But yeah, we very much approach each project in its own right. So some will, you know, require that data warehouse or a data lake. Some will require a fully, you know, an integrated platform to make sure the right data is then surfaced to their CRM system. But yes, I think, you know, sometimes people do approach these projects in terms of we need to get rid of every system and we need to put it into one main database or one main CRM system. There we go. It's all secure and it's all great. But, you know, the world's really not like that. It's not a perfect place. And so it's very much, you're still going to have data in different pockets of systems within your organization. It's how you manage that, I think.
And I think it's understanding why you need a data strategy, like answering that question sort of very early on. Why do we need one before you start going into the detail? And for us, you know, again, looking at some of those reports, you know, they were a point in time snapshot of an activity, and that could have been based on data from last week, last month. You know, no one really knew. So we don't have up to, you know, we didn't have up to the minute, you know, or very, you know, the latest data to work on, right? And we weren't confident on how old that data was and how old those insights were. So when we're going through a particular, I'm sure everyone, you know, here who's in the sector knows that Christmas tends to be an incredibly busy time for everyone, you know, and those that during that period, you know, it can take maybe days, if not weeks, to produce certain reports. By then, you know, the data's out of, you know, that report's well out of date and things have potentially moved on quite significantly. And there's a whole industry of people in the background as well that are you know, churning that data. So again, you know, you need to understand why it is, you know, and because people will throw phrases like real time, you know, and things like that. But, you know, all of these things come at a cost. So at the end of the day, you need to really understand what it is that you're looking for, and what sort of budget you have available to do it, and what sort of experience you have internally to then help you decide, you know, who's the right partner, and you know, and bring them in to kind of help accelerate some of the work that you need to do potentially.
Yeah. Well, I think you may have touched on a few points, which is great because that leads in really nicely into the next section that I wanted to cover. So what is a data strategy? So there are lots of different definitions. You know, but I think this is kind of, for me, was the one that was most relevant to us in our sector. It's a long-term plan that's aligned with your organizational strategy. That's an important point that defines the data-related technology, processes, people, and rules that you require, right? So it's really like anything else. It's about just understanding what you've got, understanding where you want to get to, and how are you, and devising a plan for where you want to, you know, how you're going to get there. So if we look at your data strategy, for me, it defines things like the collection of data, where it's stored, how do you govern it? You know, what rules do you have in place in terms of who has access to it? What can they do with it? You know, even down to things like how long you store it. So I think a lot of us, you know, benefited a lot from GDPR. I think GDPR was actually a really useful tool in terms of a data tool, forcing us to actually get to grips with data. Security, probably one of the most important aspects of a data strategy for obvious reasons. You've got to make sure that your data is secure. It has intrinsic value, but we also know that there are a lot of people who want access to that data. And specifically within the context of the, you know, charities in the NFP sector, if we get that wrong, the security aspect has the ability to embarrass us and to actually have, you know, a lot of governance issues asked of us. Management is really about how you know, what tools have you got in place? How are you managing the data? How are you moving it? How are you defining its value? And effectively, that management piece has a little foothold in all of the other little aspects of the data strategy. An important one is integration, which is there about, thinking about, you have data in different places. So you may have, CRM data in both you might have contact or beneficiary or fundraising data in both systems, between your CRM and your finance system, and understanding that data and how it's integrated is really a kind of key important part. And I think that's where your technology partner needs to have a say. You need to have some control over that process, but it's a really important point. And then the whole reason you kind of want to do all this stuff with data is to have the insights so that you can make better decisions. So that is really encompassing your kind of data strategy, and it looks at how your people, your processes, and the systems that you have are all influencing that data strategy, or how their day-to-day functions are influenced by the data strategy. And then really important here is, how do you take your data strategy and align it to your organizational strategy? So if you're a charity and your organizational sort of, one of your 2025 objectives is to grow donors via street fundraising, you do need to think, how can my data strategy enable that? What systems or processes do I have to have in place? What do I have to think about? How do I secure that data if I'm using a third-party tool? Have I asked the right questions of those potential providers? Have I got the right management tools in place to keep track of it? Is the data integrated? Am I creating duplicates and creating messy data? Or have I really got a handle on that? And then can I actually draw some really useful insights from it? And actually, when you're thinking about data insights, I would almost encourage you to start and think backwards. What do I want to achieve from this data insight? And then think, do I have all of the component pieces in place to do it? Probably not, but then it tells you where to go. And so that's a kind of high level view of a data strategy. And this is kind of back to the point that I think Tori and Enrico were making, is you've got to get the balance right. It's really important to note that, the data strategy, we've got 6 steps coming up in the next slide. This is almost a caution. It's not going to be a case of everyone on the call, go away and start implementing these 6 steps tomorrow, and by the end of August, we'll give you a score and tell you if you've done it all. It's certainly not that. Different organizations will have very different resources, timelines, data uses, strategic objectives, systems, levels of maturity. And you've got to set a strategy that you can control and that you can evolve around. So it needs to be incremental. So don't see it as a 6-month project, see it as a 3-year plan. It needs to be achievable. And so you need to work with what you've got. You need to identify the gaps if you have gaps, and then present those to the board to get the budget. And I'm going to come back to that point later when I've got a good question for Enrico about how do you go about doing that. But ultimately, it has to be practical. So I'd say, please strive to get the balance right. But we did want to sort of spark some progress on this topic. So we put together 6 steps for developing your data strategy. So starting with an assessment. Typically, people might use the word audit, but I think audit implies something a little bit too onerous here. I think just assess your current landscape. Understand what you have, where, map its data sources, where is data flowing to and from. And if you don't know, put question marks on it, because it tells you, I've got to go and find that information. And effectively what you're doing is you're doing a discovery of processes, gaps, and needs. And you really kind of also should try and understand who owns different data. So you'll draw a map that will sort of give you, you've got data here in your CRM, understand who owns it. And I think to Enrico's point, it's quite interesting when you do this exercise, you sometimes find that people are working with data, but they don't necessarily own it. They don't feel responsible or empowered for it. And it just, the processes are there and you've inherited them. So I think that's something to think about. Then moving to defining your data goals, and then looking at your organizational goals and seeing what can you draw from that so that you can see, all right, how can data and the use of data enable our organizational goals? So an example might be, you want to increase donations. If you're in the membership space, maybe you want to increase your lifetime value. So understand those organizational goals and then look at what does the data strategy need to do to support that and identify if there are any gaps. Set standards for quality. So do try and understand, what does good look like? And again, going back to my suggestion about making it practical and achievable, understand what good quality looks like. Now, thankfully, there's a lot of good practice out there. You also get quite a lot of guidance from the Charity Commission, et cetera, in terms of setting standards for quality. So the information is out there. You just have to decide what's practical and achievable for you and kind of grade it into where we are now. How can I improve through increasing the standards over time? And then defining your integration requirements is not implementing them, it's not setting any sort of integration in place, but it's just starting to understand, what do I want from the data landscape as you start moving forward? So just define what you want data to, which data do you want to be integrated, which data, to Dory's point, can be an isolated single point system, and having that looked at by what's its intrinsic value to the broader strategy. Then kind of looking at it from a data governance and compliance perspective, looking at implementing a data governance framework, that in itself is probably a much broader topic. We could probably do a whole webinar on that alone, but you obviously get the idea. And the data governance framework is something that we can share with you if you're interested in. Just let us know in the chat, and we can share something with you if you do want to go down that road. That allows you to actually understand and score your different data sources and what's their degree of maturity, and therefore are there any governance gaps and any things that you need to do to put in some compliance to support them. A really key point for me is assigning data owners. So looking at people in your organization who can own those different data sources. I would encourage you to not always think about them just being the guys in IT. I think they're there to support data owners, but data owners are typically those champions, departmental champions, who really understand their data, and more importantly, understand the use of data and how they can use it to make their lives better, to do more for their donors or for their stakeholders, or to produce better insights for management. And then a key part that will come out of the data governance framework is looking at if you've got any compliance or security gaps. If you've got a compliance issue where you don't know if you can fully meet an information discovery request, or if you've got any specific demands. A key one there would be looking at, do you transact online? Are you DSS compliant to the latest standards? Do you need to think about PCI compliance? Those are the type of things that will come out in doing the strategy. So again, you're probably all nodding and saying, yeah, I know about PCI. It's how you bring it all together. And then really important is to create a steering group to manage that. So any thoughts before we move on to the next three from Enrico? I think your experience of things that you may have used in your journey.
Yeah, I mean, we were really fortunate in that, we've worked with, the reason I'm here today, we worked with both Hart and m-hance on our projects. And I think, again, bringing in that external perspective into our environment was really key for our project, to get it off the ground and to kind of keep the momentum going on it as well. So I think, you guys really helped us to define a lot of those needs, at the beginning of the project. But I think even from within Brooke, we knew that, as I mentioned earlier on, that our data was very siloed, and it was being used for very specific tasks. And pulling all of that together as an insight for the organization was becoming increasingly important, right? Because what we're talking about really here is something that, for example, retailers, travel industry, sports and entertainment organizations have dealt with for the last 10 years, 15 years. So this is nothing new in the IT sector. And you made a really, really good point as well around where the ownership of the data sits. So it doesn't always sit in IT. In fact, it very rarely sits within IT from my experience in the sector so far. And then when you start digging into things like contracts, right? So you start looking at the contract that was signed maybe 5 years ago for a service or a product, and you start to go through the detail and you start to see lots of quite worrying things in there, which again, someone who's not from a technical background and someone who's not from a commercial background might not spot some of those things, in the standard T's and C's of an organization. So, these are things that are just really, really important as part of what, this planning takes.
Yeah, really good point.
Yeah, I was just going to say on the data owner, I agree, actually. I don't think that typically we don't see data owners sitting in IT, and they're usually data and analytics or data and insight. We're seeing a lot more of those dual roles that are coming out now. But those data owners are really key, really in terms of, I suppose, data migration for projects as well. So, typically when we engage with organizations and we do an assessment of where the data is and so forth, and people say, yeah, we want all this data, in the platform. And we have to sit down and sort of talk with them and to actually say, well, do you really need to know that I gave you £10 15 years ago? Yeah. Do you need all that detailed history, or can we just roll it up? And so, my summary over the past however many years. But those data owners are, absolutely pivotal to any CRM project, we would say. And like you said right at the beginning, actually, Alan, in terms of the insights and what you want to get out is only as good as the data that's in there, right? So data and insights, data owners are roles that will, not just for data strategy, but very much going throughout the whole of the sort of CRM project. And they're not typically techie as such, but they do understand data and understand what needs to be.
And I think part of that is also you've got to think about the people change side of this, because that's an incredibly difficult challenge, or can be, again, because you're taking something, in effect, you're taking something away from someone or a team and centralizing it and changing that process. And suddenly this thing that they've been doing for X number of years, day in, day out, maybe spending 2 or 3 hours of their day or their week doing it, disappears. And you need to think about how that's going to impact those individuals and what value you're going to be giving back to them by taking that away. So there's a lot of people change considerations that you have to make in this as well when you're talking about data owners and taking the control away from those data owners that they may have had for a number of years.
Yeah, well, I think that gets to our next piece, where I'll just bring these up in terms of, the change plan and coming up with the data practices is starting to see this as kind of part of the transformation. And I think it's important that, as an example, Enrico's full title, I know we put it up as Chief Technology Officer, but I think, Enrico, your full title is Chief Technology Officer and Transformation.
But Chief Transformation Officer, I didn't want to have that really long title that doesn't fit on the cards that you get at conferences anymore. So I shortened it down.
But it's an important one, because I think that as you've pointed out, this is about change, and it isn't just about putting it all into paper. You are going to have to take people along for the journey and bring their hearts and minds along, and so then it's about kind of coming up with that transition plan. In anything that you're doing with change management should be really kind of underpinned by communicate. If you've said it 10,000 times, say it another 10,000 times, and someone might listen. And I think really the key thing that we've also defined here, I guess, or spoken about, is defining the sort of the key roles and responsibilities for each person to understand. If you're responsible for data, what do you need to do with it? What is the best practice that you need to have, and ensuring that everybody just understands the importance of data and what their role is. And then I think you get into more of the kind of more technical implementation tasks. So I'm going to move through these fairly quickly, just because I think that we could spend a lot of time on each one. But it's in this stage that you start thinking about, how am I going to cleanse the data? How am I going to identify and manage the duplicates, especially if you're starting to think about integration? I would encourage people to agree a metadata framework. And so a metadata framework is literally just your dictionary of terms when you're dealing with data. So making sure that a donor has the same meaning across different systems. And so it's important, and I think Tori and I can speak from experience, where you get asked, to brought into one part of a project, and you can have different terminology in different places. It seems fairly trivial, but it can set your project off on a very different footing if not everyone's on the same page. So
what we actually do, Alan, is we have a group. We've learned by our mistakes, and we have a glossary now right at the beginning of the project. So actually say, so that the department, what somebody calls a donor might be a supporter in another department, or a contact in another, or whatever. So that glossary is great, because it also enables us to, what is that field in the platform, let's say Dynamics, what was it in Dynamics as standard? So yes, that glossary becomes a bit of a Bible, really, I think, especially at the start of the discovery workshop, because if you're flipping between supporter, donor, member, whatever, it's confusing. So I agree, having that metadata framework is really key.
And it'll have different names. In my past, we used to call it a data dictionary. That term has actually evolved, so we had to change it. But and I think then looking at actually, then you'll implement your integration and your synchronization. I think the point here is really document that. Have someone in your organization who owns that documentation. Your tech partner, might be responsible for producing the nucleus of it. But my advice is take that information and make sure that someone in your organization really understands that. They don't have to understand it down to a field level, but they do need to understand right, how's the data now fitting? Because if you and we'll talk about roles in a bit, but that should really be your data steward who kind of understands the high level picture about where is everything and how is it synchronized? Do I understand nominated kind of data owners for things?
Mm-hmm.
I've spoken here about data warehouse considerations, which I think is an important point. We could talk about this again almost as an entirely separate topic. Maybe we will have one just in terms of when do you need a data warehouse, but it's at this point that you start asking the questions. Have I got too much data, historical data, in a functional, system like a CRM or like a finance system, and should it really exist in a data warehouse? If you do that, you then start to ask the questions: what are the governance rules? What's the security? How am I going to manage that data? And so then it allows you to have, take charge of that point, rather than getting halfway through a project and then realizing, wait a minute, actually, we probably need a data warehouse. Ask yourself the questions first. Engage with the tech partner, ask them for their input on, do you need a data warehouse? If you have a data warehouse, how is this data going to integrate with it? All of these things are just considerations that you need to have asked yourself the questions. And then you start getting into, how am I going to report on this? What tools am I going to use to report on it? Who's going to own reporting? What are the types of reports that we need? And starting to come up with just a sub strategy for what are we going to do when we get asked questions by the board. How many donors do we have, knowing which system that's going to come from, which one's the owner, which one's the slave, etc. All of those things are things you need to have in place. And then I've put two further points in. I put little asterisks next to them, and I've put them in a different font color to stress that these are, as you start thinking about your digital maturity, if your digital maturity is in the intelligent and you're starting to move towards the optimized stage, I think you can start to think about these. Do you have the capability for predictive analytics? Can you get artificial intelligence to trawl your data and tell you what's going to happen next before someone on the board asks that question? Nirvana. But just be cautious that you could be getting distracted by a lot of people talking about AI and bells and whistles. If you really haven't done all the foundation work, that's going to be folly. And probably, if you really have done a data strategy, you would realize that you haven't got the governance in place. You don't have an organizational objective for it. So you can do it if all the levers are pointing in that direction. And a very similar thing for something called master data management. The acronym MDM gets used a lot. Do seriously think about whether you do need that. That's more of an enterprise tool. We are starting to see it creeping into sort of the mid-market space, which is great, but it's a tool, and it requires a lot of time and attention and management and cost to really leverage it. Mm-hmm. And if you don't do it properly, your strategy will probably say, box tick, my MDM is taking care of my compliance, my security, et cetera, and you may then find that you haven't invested significantly in it and it isn't up to scratch, and then you actually have gaps in your strategy. So don't go and buy a tool to make your strategy work. Buy a tool to enable your strategy, if that's what your strategy says. And then really sort of closing the loop on that is just continually monitoring and improving it. So again, going back to the first point, this isn't your data strategy isn't just something for Christmas. It does need to have a life beyond, go live. And if you really implement it, you'll find it a useful tool and continually refresh. I would suggest conducting an annual review, and that will encourage you to go back up to step one, just assess the current landscape, go through your documentation, map it all out. And actually, as you go through years 2 and 3, possibly 4 and 5, it shouldn't be, more than, a couple of days worth of work, and it becomes iterative. You'll be doing this on a regular basis. So I wanted to look at kind of benefits next, but any thoughts from Enrico or Tori on that?
No, I was just going to say AI will be here. So I think you were sort of like, if you were, that predictive analytics, is happening now. Obviously, it
is.
It's not will it, one day, it is there now. So I just wanted to say that. So
yes, don't worry. We all, I think that's really actually probably my concern is it's here now. Do you have a strategy for managing? So,
well, the thing is, as soon as what's going to be really good at as well, because remember, at the end of the day, an AI is great at providing contextual answers based on the data that it's been fed with, and that data is your data, right? So if your data is bad data, you're going to get bad answers. So it's going to be very good if you haven't got control and you don't understand your data, and you plug AI on top of it. It's going to be very, very good at revealing some of those inefficiencies to the organization as a whole, right? So So you need to think about that and be really careful about implementing AI before you're more confident around the data.
Yeah.
For sure.
All right, so I thought what I'd do here is just to help sell it, because it does require effort. So what are the benefits of having a data strategy? I'd summarize them in terms of remaining relevant, and I think relevance is an important topic, especially for us in the charity space. Ensuring that you can remain relevant, trusted, competitive, and compliant are ultimately the high level sort of benefits. But I put them into four or five buckets. I'm sure there are a lot more. It's just hard to put them all onto one screen. I think for me, ultimately, you will be able to make better decisions. If your data is understood and it's properly integrated and you know its value, you can ask questions. You can support the board better when they ask you for something. You can go to the data and ask it a question. And that's probably one of the areas that AI will probably excel at. Really important. It helps if you have a data strategy to manage the risk and compliance. And I think that's really going back to that scary stat that we looked at the beginning. I think that's really the reason why people aren't feeling that confident. They don't feel confident about the risk and the compliance aspect. In terms of functionality, I think people are very comfortable with that, but it's really just being comfortable with managing the risk. So once you've implemented a really thorough data strategy, you will get that confidence that you can look forward rather than continue looking over your shoulder and questioning, do I have everything I need in terms of ticking those boxes? You will start to improve efficiency, and efficiency can mean a lot of things. It could mean agility. It could mean cutting costs, because I think when you do a data strategy, you might find that you have got unnecessary data costing you thousands of pounds a month in certain places that you may or may not need. And so understanding its value and its cost is probably also part of it, and a benefit that you can extract from the process. You will get to optimize processes, which in itself will improve efficiency. But optimizing processes, this is a good opportunity where I'm sure if you really get to look at it and ask people why are they using that data in that way, it gives you the opportunity to start optimizing processes, to use things like automation, and ultimately enable your users to do more with their time rather than repetitive menial tasks, because you've got data in two places and you only need it in one. And then ultimately, for me, I think this is the one that does get missed because it's very internally focused. But ultimately, if you really have control of your data, you will generate a better customer experience. And I know that customer experience in our sector is sometimes not the right word, but I actually do think it's relevant here, because we're talking about member or donor, across the NFP sector, stakeholder, all of those people can be encapsulated into customer or even user experience. You will do better if this is not a mess. And I think if you speak to your staff, they'll all tell you that a lot of the times the data and the quality and the accessibility of data does stop them from doing great work. And then just looking at the kind of roles that I think you probably need to think about. So a data steward, this is an individual responsible for managing the data. This is probably the person who takes the role on for defining and running the data strategy. They set the data strategy, they look at quality and compliance, and they report on progress. And I think it's important that reporting on progress is fundamental to the role, because it forces someone to keep going back and looking at it and seeing, can we do better? They ultimately obtain board level buy-in and drive the transformation program. Then you have your data owners, which I think we've spoken about. These are individuals. There'll be many of them. They don't think of them in terms of a CRM data owner. They're probably people within departmental functions that might be head of fundraising. They might be the head of membership. Those are typically the people who should either be the data owners or nominate people within their teams to be data owners. And they're the ones who need to understand and make decisions at a departmental level about who accesses what and when, make sure that that's fed back into the plan. You then have your business users or everybody else who work with the owners. They need to understand what good looks like, and they need to understand the rules that they can operate within. You have your compliance and legal teams. This will be, could be someone's a small one-person role. It could be an entire function within an organization, depending on size. But they need to tell the data steward what the compliance requirements are. They need to feed into the strategy. And then you have your technology and partners. And so I've put these ones sort of second last, because I think the inclination is to think, oh, it's just an IT function. This really shouldn't be an IT function. This is a management strategy level function that crosses all the sort of stakeholders, and technology is there to provide support in terms of governance, tools to manage it, etc. But they can only respond to what the strategy is asking for. IT shouldn't drive the strategy, it should enable it. And then I think really important is that the data steward should have a board level position, and they should have visibility of key strategic initiatives to bring from the organizational strategy to enable the data strategy to make more sense. So really that kind of hopes to wrap it up there. Over to you, Joyce. I think we wanted to ask everyone a question.
Yes, thank you, Alan. Just going to run another quick poll if that's all okay. So bear with me. So that should be coming up now. So really just to understand where you are sort of in your technology journey. So, you know, you've gone live with your system, it's in sort of that refinement stage, or that you've, you know, really recently implemented new technology, but you're kind of struggling with it and knowing what to do around data, or you're thinking about that change, you're looking at, you know, potentially partners and options, or again, refining your requirements or looking at your options. So I'm just gonna let that run for another second. Bear with me and let me just end that poll and share the results. So quite a mix, actually, I would say, kind of with the highest level really about defining requirements and assessing options, but then equally followed by in the process of implementing new technology. So I think that's quite interesting on that side. I don't know if you want to add anything else to that, Alan. I'll just stop sharing these now.
No, I mean, I think we typically see with that, it's almost always that sort of picture, but it'd be useful to know from maybe some of those people who are in the middle of it, you know, have you thought about some of these things, and, you know, what are you doing? So maybe there's a bit of a dialogue there, but I think this was a good opportunity to then hand it over a little bit just to Enrico and to Tori. I know that we wanted to get to some questions. So I think it would be useful, Enrico, if you could just do a 2-minute summary of your experience with Brooke and how you kind of saw I guess it's also useful to explain what Brooke does, to give context to the size and scale of the challenge.
Yeah, so we're a global charity. So we are an animal welfare and communities charity. So we support communities with their working animals, working horses, donkeys, mules, to care for their animals, because they're obviously used for transportation or used in industry. And so we make sure that they can care for their animals effectively, and we train people on how to do that. So we're kind of the people behind the people that actually do the animal welfare work. So we operate in India, Pakistan, Senegal, Ethiopia, Kenya, and Nicaragua. So we're in a lot of quite challenging communities as well. So very remote, very difficult to reach communities. And, you know, for us, we had, again, the biggest challenge for us was around, you know, where is our data? What does our data tell us? What's it all mean? Who owns it? How secure is it? How much of it do we have? So from you know, this is much about understanding, you know, are you within compliance reasons? You know, are you holding too much data? So we had to do a lot of work around that. And one of the things that we did was actually identify a number of risks, which we then put into our risk register, which we highlighted to our board of trustees. We all have board of trustees, and they start to get quite concerned if there's increasing numbers of risks and increasing numbers of ambers and reds in that risk register as well. So we did, you know, a lot of work around that. So that's, I mean, do's and don'ts really for me are, I would say, is, you know, understand your limitations, I guess, organizationally, what knowledge you have internally and what knowledge you don't have, and use partners where you know, where you need to and as much as you can, purely because they're the ones with the expertise, and they can accelerate a lot of the work that you're going to need to do to get better and understand your data better. And I don't want to take, you know, I could go on for a long time about this subject, but I know we want to do some Q&A.
Yeah, I was going to just actually jump in there, Enrico, and just because one of the questions I did want to cover around that is, I've been asked to look at doing a data strategy. Have you got any advice on getting started in the key areas to cover? Because you know, having gone through this and you're going through this, I suppose what for you would be the key place to start?
I think the very beginning for me is I think where it starts to generate a lot of attention is in the risk register. Okay, so actually identifying within your organization where, you know, what are the risks of not having a data strategy, of not having control of your data. and then putting that into your risk register and talking to your trustees about it. Because at the end of the day, at some point you're going to need budget for this work. You know, none of it's going to be free, right? So that will help you start to build a business case around creating a budget, and then it becomes quite an easy conversation, because you can point to the risk register and say, right, we'll address these risks by having a data strategy and by talking to a partner like m-hance or Hart Square. So that's the sort of genesis of it. And then, the next part for me is identifying the partners. And there are some amazing, in the charity sector, having just been in it, compared to what you get in the private sector, and the kind of the size of organizations, and the kind of, they don't really care about what it is that you do ultimately, right? They just care about the money that you're going to give them for the project. But within the charity sector, I've seen so many partners that absolutely care so much about the charities that they work for, and doing good within the sector. So I would definitely reach out to m-hance and Hart Square as well to start that conversation going. But internally, to get that business case, I think start with the board of trustees, start with your risk register, and start with the why. Why are we doing this? Why do we need this?
Yeah, absolutely. And great to hear the recommendations as well. Tori, the same question to you, really. If you had, say, a key area for people to think about to get started, what would it be for you?
Yeah, I mean, I support, what Enrico says, but I would probably say, do a data assessment. Just really, where is your data? The number of times we, respond to tenders or go into presentations, say, where's your data? Oh, it's all in our incumbent CRM. It's all there, and it's all fine. It's all deduped, and it's all cleansed. And it's great. And we never believe them, because it rarely is. Okay, people do use spreadsheets, and we sort of tend to have a data amnesty. Yeah, so people can just say, actually, I've got some data in this spreadsheet, and they can just upload it. So there's a data amnesty that we sort of encourage beginning of the project. But I think anybody who goes to do an assessment of where the data is in your organization, you will be surprised, where it's being stored on laptops still, on OneDrive, wherever it is. So that will drive your business case as well, Enrico, and it will open up the risks that you have to, gosh, our data is everywhere. So that's what where to start. I would just, high level snapshot view, where is our data?
Yeah, absolutely. And just really conscious of time, so we haven't had a chance to get through all the questions, so we'll happily follow up with any of them. But there is kind of one on so we've done the where to start. At the end, the question of how to ensure bad data practices don't creep in again after we've done all this work. Is there a key? I'm putting you under time pressure now. I'm going to go to Enrico first. You've done all the work. How do you stop bad practices coming back in again?
Well, I think let's let Tori first, because she's got more experience of various different charities in the sector.
I think typically a lot of bad quality data is sometimes with sometimes user error, putting data in, not searching if that contact's already there, or just put it in, that sort of stuff. But, I think, managing data quality is always ongoing as well. And that is down to people, projects are people. It's going to be down to your integrations, what data are you bringing in and where is it putting it? How are the integrations ensuring that data quality is there? So I'll say people and integrations in the time that I've and I'll hand over to Enrico. There's a lot more. We could spend a whole webinar on data quality.
Yeah, I mean, I had a great example. I had one of the directors say to me, when can X person stop working on the project? And I said, they're never going to stop working on it. They're always going to be, the go live for me is day one of, this is a new system. This is a new processes, new ways of working. Right. So this is just our go live is the beginning. Right. And there's a constant journey that we're going to be going on around, the way the system is being used, how well it's being used, training new people as they come into the organization, and making sure that they're aware. So we have invested in a third party tool called WhatFix to help us with the kind of training and adoption of the platform. But again, you need to have regular audits, regular checks of your data, someone within your fundraising team, for example, because they're the people that understand the data the best. You need a senior person in that team, as an example, that's constantly looking at the data, running reports, making sure that things are not going out of control. Because again, it's so easily, it can happen quite easily. Over a period of time, 6 months later, you're in a bit of a mess again. So you definitely need to have those controls in place.
And I love your comment that basically the project doesn't stop on go live; it continues on, and you constantly need to look at it. And at that point, you're going to bring in Alan for final comments and thoughts.
Well, thank you. I guess we'll just, first of all, thank you to our guests, because I think it's always more interesting when we can have real world, experience of this, and especially with someone like Enrico's experience and Tori's, experience as well. But just looking at the overall data strategy, the topic of data strategy, I think the fact that there are 30 odd people on this call today is a good thing, because it shows that people are paying attention to it. And so I think, to the question, how do you ensure it? Often just let people know that you're paying attention to it. And when people know that, okay, there's another box to tick, but it is there and it is being watched by the board, that tends to help make people a little bit more focused on the importance of data. I wouldn't make it all stick. A little bit of carrot there is useful too, but ultimately the carrot will come in terms of people's day-to-day operations improving, because they won't have to do as much manual labor. So that's my bit, and I wanted to say thank you to everybody on the call as well for joining us, and we will be circulating the deck and the recordings in a few days, so look out for that. Over to you, Joyce.
Perfect. No, really just to say thank you all, to Enrico, Tori and Alan, and for the rest of you for joining us, and to say very happy to follow up on any of the questions that we didn't get to answer, and I will now hand you back so you can go back to your next meetings. But thank you again, and hopefully see you on the next in our series on July the 11th. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.